Okay, let's take a look at passage 5. I'll tell you again, this does contain an argument. So read it over and see if you can identify the ultimate conclusion, whether it is stated or not. Pause the video and start again when you're ready. Okay, I think that this is trying to convince us that students should be required to obtain doctor's permission before taking a philosophy class. So that is the ultimate conclusion. Now we're going to go back to the top and try to find the first two things to pay attention to. So, philosophy calls into question many of a person's fundamental beliefs, and anything that questions many of a person's fundamental beliefs can cause emotional distress because our fundamental beliefs, like whether God exists or not, help us to feel safe in the world. So, do you think that's going to be important to the argument? Is anything in there going to be given as a reason to believe that you should be required to obtain a doctor's permission before you took this class? I think so. So the only question is, how many claims? So pause the video, ask yourself, how many claims would you divide that into? Would you take it just as one big claim, like an if-then? Would you divide it into two, or would you divide it into three? Pause the video, think about it, come back when you're ready. Okay, well, there is this because. We certainly have to divide around that. What about this and? Should we divide around the and? I think so. Generally speaking, good rule of thumb, divide around an and a but and equivalent expressions, unless you have a darn good reason not to. So philosophy calls into question many of a person's fundamental beliefs. Anything that does that can cause emotional distress because our fundamental beliefs help us to feel safe in the world. Now, for heaven's sake, stop there. The last thing we want to do is go on reading until we figure out how to deal with this part. Now, what should we do? Should we ask, how is 2 related to 3? Should we ask, how is 3 related to, this should be 4, sorry about that. Or should we ask some completely different question, right? Should we wonder how are 2 and 3 related? Should we wonder how are 3 and 4 related? Or should we wonder something else? Pause the video, think about that, come back when you're ready. I would ask how 3 is related to 4, because my practice, and it's a good practice, is to represent inference indicators before doing anything else. So take a moment and think, how is 3 related to 4? And map that. It's 3 because 4. So 4 is being given as a reason to believe 3. It is like that. Very good. Now we can go back and ask, how is 2 related to this 3, 4 bit? Would it be with an inference, with an arrow, with a plus, because they are dependent reasons, or 2 separate arrows? Think about that. Pause the video, come back when you're ready. Okay, I think it should be an added, it should be a plus. And it looks to me like 2 and 3 should be added together because they have that common concept that is so nice. Philosophy calls into question many of a person's fundamental beliefs, and anything that questions many of a person's fundamental beliefs can cause emotional distress. So they have a lot in common. By the way, before we add a missing or potentially not missing, before we add a subconclusion there, I want to just note an added benefit of taking care of the inference before you take care of the plus. You're not going to have the arrow going to a plus that way, because arrows, remember, go to claims. Inferences go to claims. They never go to pluses. So ask yourself, what follows from 2 and 3? Philosophy calls into question many of a person's fundamental beliefs. And anything that calls into question many of a person's fundamental beliefs can cause emotional distress. So what follows? Think about that. Pause the video. Come back when you've decided. Okay, well, let's see. What do they have in common? Calling into question many of a person's fundamental beliefs. So that's where they hook up. What's left over? Philosophy and causing emotional distress. So we get philosophy can cause emotional distress. That is the subconclusion. The only question is it stated or not? So let's read. Furthermore, it's clear that emotional distress can cause serious psychological harm. That's not this. If the author were going to state this subconclusion, she would have stated it right away. So it's not stated. So we will add it as a missing subconclusion. There we go. And now we go back. Furthermore, it's clear that emotional distress can cause serious psychological harm. That's going to be important. Claim 5. So ask yourself, how is claim 5 related to the 2, 3, 4, and A bit? How is that related? Pause the video, think for a bit, come back when you're ready. Okay, what did you decide? It looks to me like it would be added, and it looks to me like it would be added to A. So let's do that. And now you know what I'm going to ask next. I'm going to ask, fine, if I'm adding A and 5, what follows? So let's see. A plus 5 gives us what? So think about that. Philosophy can cause emotional distress, A. Emotional distress can cause serious psychological harm, 5. What follows? Pause the video, think about that, come back when you're ready. Okay, well, what do they have in common? Emotional distress looks like philosophy can cause emotional distress. Emotional distress can cause serious psychological harm. So what do we know about philosophy? Looks like it can cause serious psychological harm. You get that just by the puzzle piece test, taking a look at what's in common and then ignoring that and putting together the stuff that's not in common. Right, let's double check. Philosophy, let's see. A says philosophy can cause emotional distress, right? 5 says emotional distress can cause psychological harm. So yeah, philosophy can cause serious psychological harm, copacetic. Now, the only question is that a stated or an unstated subconclusion? Well, let's read on. The fact that universities have the responsibility to protect their students, okay, that's something completely different. So this is going to be an unstated subconclusion that goes right there. Hopefully this is starting to feel a little bit more fluid. Now, if it is, that is great. I mean, own that. Also acknowledge that it's often more fluid when you're sort of doing it with somebody. It's a little bit harder to maybe do it all on your own, but once you feel good about following along, it's not that hard to internalize these questions. And in fact, that is exactly what that procedure, the beginning of this chapter, is all about. They are the questions that you should internalize so you are never walking alone. You are always walking with sort of somebody guiding you through this process. And that's how I think. Okay, so philosophy can cause serious psychological harm. Super, let's go on. The fact that universities have a responsibility to protect their students entails that universities should require students to obtain doctors' permission before engaging in any activity that causes them serious psychological harm. Okay, that's going to be important. How many claims would you get out of that? 1, 2, or 3? Pause the video, think about that, come back when you're ready. think I'd get 2. We have the entails that, right? That is a not very commonly utilized, but nonetheless, it is an inference indicator. It is like therefore. So we have universities have a responsibility to protect their students. 6. Therefore, universities should require students to obtain doctor's permission before engaging in anything that could cause them harm. 7. Okay. Now question, what should I do? Should I ask, how is 6 related to the 234A5B bit? Or should I ask, how is 6 related to 7? Pause the video, think about that, come back when you're ready. Okay, so inference indicator expressions trump everything, right? We need to think about how 6 and 7 are related to each other. How would they be related to each other? Well, I just said that 6, that entails that is like therefore, right? So it's going to be 6 supporting 7, like so. 6 entails that 7. Now, I intentionally wrote that kind of in a weird place because I don't want to prejudice the answer to this next question, which is, how is this thing related to that thing? With an arrow, with a plus, or separate? Think about that, pause the video, come back when you're ready. I'm thinking probably plus, right? But then what should be added to what? I think the idea or the claim to really focus on in this larger unit, the 234A5B bit, is the B, because kind of everything is getting us to B. So we can ask, how is B related to 6? How is B related to 7? And figure out which of those two claims, 6 or 7, pairs more nicely with B. Okay, philosophy can cause serious psychological harm. Universities have a responsibility to protect their students. Well, I mean, I can see some connection between B and 6, which is what that would be. Let's take a look at B and 7. Philosophy can cause serious psychological harm. Universities should require students to obtain doctor's permission before engaging in any activity that could cause them serious harm. I see a tighter connection there because both B and 7 are talking about activities that could cause serious harm. So I am going to move, or just rather kind of repeat this down here, and I would add the B to the 7, like that. And now again, do you see the wisdom of taking care of that inference first before we ask, how is 6 related to this thing? If we got that too firmly in our head, how is 6 related to all the stuff that went before, we would really be stuck because it's not that related to the stuff that went before. Really, the relationship is not between 6 and this other unit, but between 7 and that other unit. So this now should be starting to feel really familiar. As soon as we add two things, we ask what follows from them. So let's check. Philosophy can cause serious psychological harm. Universities should require students to obtain doctor's permission before engaging in any activity that could cause them serious psychological harm. You see what follows? If you don't, read them in the other order. Universities should require students to obtain doctor's permission before engaging in any activity that could cause them serious harm. Philosophy can cause serious psychological harm. So it looks like universities should require students to obtain doctor's permission before engaging in philosophy, which is 1. Awesome. Now note, let's just pause and take a look at this argument. This is a fairly complicated argument. And can you see how utterly daft it would be if we tried to map it without the A and the B? I just want to show this. In order to see it, what we do is we just Tetris the thing. We imagine the A and the B kind of disappearing and the thing falls down. What would that be? Well, it's going to be ugly. We are going to have 2 plus 3, and by the way, 3 would still follow from 4 because that doesn't change. And then that would be added to 5, and then that would be added to 7, and by the way, 7 would still follow from 6 because that doesn't change. And then all of that would be giving us 1. Let's just compare the roles here. Note, the role of these claims don't change. 2 is a premise, 2 is a premise. 3 is a subconclusion following from 4, which is a premise. 3 is a subconclusion following from 4, which is a premise. 5 is a premise, 5 is a premise. 7 is a subconclusion following from 6, which is a premise. 7 is a subconclusion following from 6, which is a premise. And all of this gives us 1, and all of this gives us 1. But can you see how really crazy this would be to try to understand? This would require us to do this kind of really superhuman move of putting together 4 things at a time. Brains are not built for that. There are a couple of cases where brains are actually built to put together 3 things at a time, if those 3 things fit together particularly nicely, and we will be seeing that later on. But 4 things at a time, I mean, like never. So this is just, I mean, well, no. Ugh. No. This, pretty, happy, easy to follow. Okay? So I will see you in passage 6.